I want to get into this charter school story. I mean, maybe you've seen the broad outlines. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but there was a New York Times piece. You'll all recall that movie, Waiting for Superman, which I watched a version of it called The Lottery. It was virtually the same movie, and apparently there was a lot of like charter school money slushing around at that time that would promote these films and probably finance them, frankly. A lot of this charter school money comes from hedge funders and wealthy elite people. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I mean, and to be fair, there are public schools where there's a lot of money involved too. I'm going to I don't know if I'm going to go, but there's a comedy fundraiser tonight for my daughter's elementary school that Janine is doing, and Benjamin apparently too big to do something like this, but John Glazer and Wyatt Cenac and a couple others who Eugene Merman are doing, and this is a school that gets the PTA raises a lot of money. Charter schools, I think, end up raising more because there's also a lot of for-profit guys around there. Nevertheless, one of the big arguments, one of the biggest sort of, I guess, powerhouses in charter schools, and you'll recall that she got into a big battle with Bill de Blasio, and Andrew Cuomo swooped in and championed her cause, partly because he got a lot of money from the guy from Home Depot. I can't remember his name now. What is it?
Is it Langone?
No, Ken Langone, to support charters. And she runs the Success Academy franchises of charter schools. And there was a piece in the New York Times about a Success Academy Fort Greene school. Fort Greene's a part of Brooklyn that's actually, again, a stone's throw from here. And according to documents and interviews obtained by the New York Times, the interviews were with 10 current and former Success employees at 5 schools, suggests that administrators at these schools have singled out children they want to kick out of the schools because there are either problems, disciplinary problems or just learning problems. This school in Fort Greene, apparently, somehow, the Times got hold of a got-to-go list with 16 students named essentially for the administrators to get to quit the school. And they did this by a combination, according to the parents, by a combination of harassment of the children, of making it difficult for the parents. Apparently, 9 of the students on the list at this Fort Greene school withdrew from the school. Some of the parents said their lives were upended by repeated suspensions and frequent demands that they pick up their children early or meet with school or network staff members. 4 of the parents said the school or network employees told them explicitly that the school, whose oldest students are now in the 3rd grade, was not right for their children and they should go elsewhere. The current and former employees said they had observed similar practices at other Success schools. And according to those employees who spoke on a condition of anonymity, school leaders and network staff members explicitly talked about suspending students or calling parents into frequent meetings as ways to force parents to fall in line or prompt them to withdraw their children. Last year, the principal of Success Academy Harlem told teachers to not automatically send annual re-enrollment forms to certain students because the schools did not want those students to come back. Now, what's problematic about this? The challenge with education is with public education, is how do you teach all the kids who show up at school? How do you develop a curriculum? How do you deal with kids who are coming from varying levels and varying types of socioeconomic backgrounds in one class? How do you deal with kids who are coming from poverty, even if the whole class are kids who are coming from families living in poverty? How do you deal with kids who are coming from family situations that are messed up? How do you deal with kids who have behavioral problems because of their circumstances? That is one of the biggest challenges to education. I mean, you can go into the suburbs and you can find schools that are full of kids who come from upper middle class families, and the schools are going to be performing extremely well. The question is, how do you deal? And you can go into neighborhoods with a high incidence of poverty, and if you are able to self-select who gets to come to your school, in other words, you say, only parents who are engaged in this process can have their kids come to our school. Because that's what you're saying. When you say lottery, that's what you're saying. You're saying only kids who are lucky enough to have parents who are very engaged in the process. Because I can tell you right now, I'm going through middle school a choice, and there's some that are lottery schools. There's some. It is a nightmare, and it costs money. It costs money because we've got to hire a babysitter so we can go on tour our schools, or we've got to be fortunate enough that we don't each work 2 jobs, my wife and I. So it's difficult. There is a bar to entry just to go and put your kid into the system to have an opportunity to go to these schools. And so you get to self-select on some level. Kids who are coming from homes where the parents are at least tuned in and involved. And then on top of that, you're still saying, like, we can't even if we get the statistical, like, outlier here or there, kids who are difficult to deal with out of that context, we're going to kick them out. This is supposed to be what charters are supposed to do, to learn how to and experiment with means in which you educate all the kids in the school. And this is running completely contrary to it. And also, Eva Moskowitz comes out and says this is an outlier. Never happened before. But of course, this whole report says this is their modus operandi. On top of all this, it's also starting to examine the fact that kids who go to these schools, it's basically like a military regiment. The kids have to sit there. They have to have their hands folded in a specific way on the top of the desk. I mean, look, the bottom line is that people in higher economic stratas would never allow their kids to go through this type of stuff. Never. And the schools that, like the private schools that kids, they don't do this. But in these charter schools, this is basically the trade-off. And the bottom line is that, and this is also coming on the heel of, I don't know if people have followed this story, but I don't know, it was about a month ago that the Success Academy published the disciplinary record of a 10-year-old child in retaliation because the child's mother appeared on a PBS program critical of Success Academy. And it is probably an illegal act to publish a 10-year-old's disciplinary record from a public school. But a Success Academy spokesperson told Michelle Goldberg, who had written a piece on it, that the act of publishing the record was necessary because somebody deliberately appeared on national television to defame our educators, and we had to bring the truth out or let this incendiary and defamatory report stand. How effed up is that? Can you imagine what would happen to a principal of a public school if something like that happened? I mean, give me a break.
That's like they learned from Rudy Giuliani when he released, I forget the man's name, but he was murdered
right.
By the NYPD. And part of the spin campaign was releasing his juvenile record.
Yep.
It's disgusting. And I actually I remember waiting for Superman, and how part of what made that compelling and manipulative as a movie was that it followed these likable kids. Imagine if you made a movie about likable, engaging kids who were trying their best, who were being bullied by teachers and administrators and drummed out of a charter school and held back from being with their friends and getting their full education. I mean, you can make a compelling movie just about this alone, this kind of abuse that these students faced, to being on a got-to-go list when you're 7 years old.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Disgusting.
It's unbelievable. And look, it's a difficult situation. My daughter, when she was in kindergarten, there was a kid in that class who was incredibly disruptive. And the parents refused to acknowledge that the kid was disruptive. They literally had to have the teacher had to call security on this kindergarten kid because he was flipping tables over.
Did you do that, Matt?
And
were you a table flipper?
Every once in a while.
Michael was, but fortunately for his folks, it was in his own kitchen.
Why would that be fortunate for them? That doesn't make any sense.
They didn't have to go to school to deal with it. Now, there's also a lot of you should know that there is a lot of research coming out now that is showing that zero tolerance school discipline policies, which are very big in the charter world, are now being found to have a disadvantage, a bad impact, basically, on a student's ability to learn. No studies show that an increase in out-of-school suspension and expulsion reduces disruption in the classroom, and some evidence suggests the opposite effect. This is according to a Vera analysis, apparently a study. Research shows a single suspension or expulsion doubles the odds a student will be required to repeat a grade, and being held back a grade is among the strongest predictors of dropping out. So there's a lot of evidence that these practices that success engages in is detrimental. I mean, I'm not convinced that if you give a rival to Success Academy the same funding, and now a lot of their funding comes from private fundraising efforts. I understand that, but that's just proof that this is not, you can't replicate this success across the board. 6% of New York students go to charter schools. You have to begin to wonder what the value of these programs are if they're not producing experiments and teaching strategies that are scalable. What is the value of this?